Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. First, I'd like to welcome you all to the Breakfast Matters Successful Strategies for School Breakfast webinar. We're really excited you all could join us and hope that you enjoy this webinar. My name is Alex Giles, and I'm the Policy Analyst at Healthy Schools Campaign, which is the organization that's hosting today's webinar. And we'll tell you a little bit more about Healthy Schools Campaign in a couple minutes, but first I wanted to just quickly review some basics for today's webinar. Next slide. So in addition to today's webinar, we'll be hosting 3 more webinars this spring. And you can register for the webinars online. We're going to be sending out a link right now where you can register for those 3 remaining webinars, and we hope you will be able to join us. Next slide. We'd also love for you to join the ongoing conversation that's taking place around these webinars. You can follow us on Twitter using this hashtag. And you can also visit our website, www.breakfastmatters.org. We're sending out that link as well, which has a lot of information about the program in Chicago, but also has a lot of really wonderful resources around implementing breakfast in schools. Next slide. So today's webinar is going to run for around an hour, and a recording of the webinar will be available to view after today. We'll email a link to the recording, and it'll also be archived on the Healthy Schools Campaign's website by the end of the week. Also at the webinar, we would really appreciate it, at the end of the webinar, we would really appreciate if you could take a quick survey about the webinar. And we will save 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for a question and answer session with our speakers. You can ask questions by typing a question into the questions box located on your control panel and click on the send button. So feel free to send questions throughout the webinar, and we'll collect them and then save them for the end and have our speakers answer them. Right, so we have a great lineup of speakers today. We're joined by Mark Bishop from Healthy Schools Campaign, Madeline Levin from Food Research and Action Center, Annie Lionburger from Chicago Public Schools, and Brian Giles from Houston Independent School District. Next slide. Also, we just wanted to let you know about an opportunity from our friends at foodfamilyfarming.org. Very much relevant to today's webinar. There's a grant opportunity around implementing universal breakfast programs. So we're sending out the link to that grant opportunity now. So please feel free to check that out, and there's more information about that online. Next slide. Yeah. So before we get started with Mark Bishop from Healthy Schools Campaign, we just want to ask you all a very quick question to get a better idea of who is out in our virtual audience. You could take a minute to tell us who you are. Please select one of the following: teacher, parent, school administrator, school food service employee, or other. Great. Thank you. We're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Closing it. Great. So it looks like we have a large percentage of others, so we would love to hear who you all are, but also have a mix of school food service employees, school administrators, and a few parents out there as well. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. Mark Bishop is going to tell you a little bit more about Healthy Schools Campaign and set the stage for today's webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. First of all, one day we're going to get that right mix on the questions so we don't have so many other people. But we look forward to learning who everyone is on our webinar. So first of all, a little bit about Healthy Schools Campaign. I'm not sure how many people out there are familiar with our work, but Healthy Schools Campaign is a not-for-profit. We're based in Chicago, Illinois, but our work is both local, state, and national in scope. And we work on the intersection of school health and environment, where it deals with the chronic conditions of obesity and asthma, things that really affect health in the school setting. And we work on the common sense notion that a healthy child is going to be a more successful child. And ultimately, we want what's right for our education system. We want to be able to have students and teachers that are set up for success in the long run. School breakfast has been an issue that has been integral to our work and is really part of the efforts that we continuously work on. And the reason is because successful school breakfast, it really is part of that intersection of health and environment and it really helps set students up ultimately for success. But if we were to look at the two things that we look at dealing with school breakfast, the first one is that school breakfast supports academic achievement. Whether it's looking at tardiness and absenteeism, because it isn't shown the school serving breakfast, we'll see a decrease in tardiness and absenteeism, which will improve the learning environment. A report from last year on Maryland's classroom breakfast pilot program showed that tardiness declined by 8%. And while not all of the programs out there are fully documented, we see constantly, time after time, the anecdotal information and reports saying that it is the breakfast programs get kids in school on time and keep them from being absent. The second is looking at disciplinary issues. School breakfast can help reduce disciplinary referrals. Again, in Maryland, their report, they showed that their disciplinary incidents has decreased and their school suspension dropped by nearly half the year that they implemented their pilot program. And again, if you look to the academic research, violence and aggression reduce. According to Harvard researchers, they found strong evidence that school-based programs, including breakfast, decrease rates of violence and aggressive behavior among school-aged children. And this is all about improving the school climate and creating a school environment where students can be set up for success and can learn. And if that wasn't enough, according to child nutrition studies conducted across the country, researchers have concluded that school breakfast will help children improve standardized test scores, math scores, reading abilities, pay better attention, and stay more alert. So again, breakfast is not just, it is about feeding kids, but it's also about a successful educational environment. So as we're saying, not just academics, but let's look at the health of our students. Health benefits of breakfast. We look to reducing, one of the things that we work on so closely is working on the childhood obesity issues. And with so many families struggling to put food on the table, children are at increased risk across the country for both hunger and for obesity. In school programs with nutritionally sound food, they have been associated significantly with, or they've been associated with significantly lower BMI, body mass index. And in fact, school breakfast program has been found to have an effect on lowering student weight. And for this reason, school breakfast programs have been called a valuable tool in the current battle against childhood obesity by peer-reviewed journals. Also, when we look at school breakfast programs, students who participate have increased intake in healthy food. School programs are required to meet nutrition guidelines, and they've been shown that students who participate have reduced fat consumption and increased consumption of vitamins that are required in students' daily diet. And finally, participants of school breakfast programs showed reduced school nurse visits and hunger-related complaints. And a big part of this, again, is keeping kids more attentive, keeping kids in the classroom, and creating an environment for better health and more successful students. So having said that, we're going to get started with our speakers, our main speakers. And, oh, you know, I want to mention one other thing. The other thing that we're really concerned about, we do a lot of work on environmental programs. And we are starting a conversation where in 2013 we will be releasing a guide for how to green a food service program. And breakfast in the classroom is going to be part of that. So we are engaged in conversations with school food districts, school food service programs across the country in identifying best practices, because we want to make sure that these programs are being delivered effectively, but also doing it in a way that it minimizes the waste that is created as we all are struggle to challenge to improving the health and the environmental footprints of our school programs. All right, so before we get started, and I will introduce Madeline, I will ask you guys another question. And I am curious. So my question for you here is, as it comes up, does your school have a universal breakfast program? Let's take 30 seconds to answer the question, at which point I will introduce Madeline Levin. Madeline is a senior policy analyst for the Food Research and Action Center, the leading national nonprofit organization working to improve public policies and public-private partnerships to eradicate hunger and undernutrition in the United States. She focuses on child nutrition issues, especially the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. Now I am going to close the poll. 5 more seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. closed. And let me share the information. 38% say yes, 30% no, 25% don't know, 7% in progress. So it looks like there is still work to be done and things that we can address. Wonderful. Thank you. So Madeline, I'm going to now hand it over to you. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Mark. And you can go to the next slide. I really appreciate you having me here today, and I'm really pleased to share a little bit of FRAC's work on breakfast with all of you. And Mark gave me a great introduction, and FRAC a great introduction that we do anti-hunger work, and we do that by primarily promoting the federal nutrition programs, and school breakfast is one of the really important programs that we try to increase participation in, so that it's both, as Mark I think gave a great summary, it's both a preventive against hunger and against obesity, because it's been proven to improve children's health and as well as their academic outcomes. I gave you a screenshot here of our one of our, I guess I would say it's our most popular handout that's a summary of the research on breakfast and academic achievement, which you can find on our website. And we also have a similar summary of research about the impacts of breakfast on obesity that's called Breakfast for Health. So I encourage you to use those handouts to help you with talking points when you're talking with people about the positive impacts of school breakfast. You can go to the next slide. Thanks, Mark. So just to make sure that everyone's up to speed on the program, I know we have a lot of different types of folks on the line, but I just want to make sure that everyone realizes that the school breakfast program, like the school lunch program, is overseen by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it's administered by an agency in each state. That's usually the Department of Education, but in a couple of states, it's I guess 3 states now, Florida, Texas, and New Jersey. It's administered through the State Department of Agriculture. And then it's operated locally by schools, and within each school there's what's called the School Food Authority, and that's an entity that is responsible for running the program. And I don't know if everyone realizes that the school food budget, all the money that comes in for the program and that goes out, it's all in a separate budget that's completely separate from the general fund of the school district. Next slide, please, is just a picture that you can see of how the child nutrition programs are administered, and other nonprofit private schools can also administer the school lunch and breakfast program, and this just shows the flow of dollars and oversight of the program. So on the next slide, I just wanted to go over a few key facts about the program. The program reimburses schools for the meals that are served, so schools need to actually count and account for every meal that's served in order to get the federal reimbursement. Another really important fact about the program is that it's an entitlement program. That means that funding is not capped, it's not competitive, that as many kids as need the program can get it, and schools can feed as many kids that are eligible for free or reduced price breakfast. There isn't a limit. So in recent times when the economy has been so horrible and we've had record numbers of children living in poverty with whose parents are unemployed, the program can grow to meet that need, which is really important about the program. And then, like I said, any school or residential child care institution can participate, and then any child at a school can either receive or purchase a school breakfast. The next slide goes over the eligibility criteria. So it's determined by income. 130% or below of the federal poverty line. Kids are that live in those families are eligible for free meals. Then between 130 and 185% of poverty, those kids are eligible for reduced price meals, and then everyone else has to pay the full cost of meals. And then you can see on the next slide how much money schools receive for each one of those categories. the schools do receive some money even for the paid meals, and I think that's really important to realize that the federal government does give some subsidy for all the meals that are served, and it's really important that the school breakfast program is a program for all kids, like the school lunch program. The last bullet on this slide shows an important point too, as we look at particularly schools that have high percentages of free and reduced price students attending them, that they get an extra 29 cents for each free or reduced price breakfast served if 40% or more of the kids that participate in the school lunch program are at free and reduced price. On the next slide, I wanted to just go over briefly the nutrition guidelines. It's an interesting point because we're at a historic time where the federal government is updating the nutrition requirements for both breakfast and lunch. And you can see on the next slide, I've kind of juxtaposed the current requirement with the revised breakfast requirements. So starting in this coming school year, the part of the breakfast requirement that's going to go into effect is the first bullet, that the children can only be served non-fat flavored or unflavored milk or 1% unflavored milk. Those are the only two types of milk that are allowed to be served in the National School Breakfast Program. And then starting the following year, the year after next, some of the other provisions are going to go into effect, including the grain provision, where there has to be more whole grains and the serving sizes of grains and the calorie sizes change. And then the year after that, there is going to be increased requirement for fruit servings in breakfast. Schools can substitute vegetables for some of those fruit servings as well. And when students have a chance in the offer versus serve model, where kids can choose from amongst all the components, they will be required to take a half a cup of fruit even when they are able to turn down another item. So that's a new part of the revised nutrition guidelines. And then on the next slide, I wanted to give you an idea about how many kids participate in school breakfast compared to lunch. On the next slide, you can see that many more kids participate in lunch. So only 48% of low-income children who eat breakfast at school or eat lunch at school who receive free or reduced price lunch also receive breakfast. And that if a higher percentage of kids, we just set a goal of 60% often. So if 60% of the kids, the low-income kids that ate lunch at school every day also received a breakfast, there'd be 2.4 million more low-income kids receiving breakfast in school every day, and additional $582 million in federal funds would come in for the school breakfast program. I can give you a sense of how large school districts compare. I write a report. We publish a report every year at FRAC called School Breakfast in America's Big Cities. And hopefully this isn't too small, and you can see the names of the cities along the bottom. There are a couple of counties in there. Prince George's County is in Maryland, and DeKalb County is in Georgia. Otherwise, I think I've got the city names on all of them. So you can see where the districts that are talking today on the call, Chicago and Houston, compare to other districts. So it's quite a range, and the three school districts that, or actually now four top school districts that you see on the left of this graph, District of Columbia, Houston, Detroit, and Newark, they serve significantly more higher percentages of kids, low-income kids, breakfast, because they've all implemented a universal breakfast in the classroom program in all of their schools. So going on to the next slide, I was just going to say a little bit more on how it's served. You'll hear a lot more as these great school districts that are going to be talking in the webinar about how they are able to reach so many kids with breakfast. The real key is how and where it's served, whether it's in the cafeteria before school or whether it's during school hours where kids can eat during the class, the first 10 minutes of class, with their meals either being delivered to the classroom or with them grabbing a bagged breakfast and bringing it themselves back to their classrooms. Also, we have some older kids just really grabbing a breakfast, and they actually have usually consumed it by the time they even get to their first period. And then one of the newest models that's being experimented with really still is using vending machines to vend a whole reimbursable meal, and those are being added in cafeterias, and again more with the older kids, but those have been we're finding success with using those to get the breakfast to the kids. So really the key to having higher participation on the next slide is really about making breakfast convenient and easy for kids. If they have to get to school ahead of time, early before class starts, it makes it much harder, either because they're running late, they don't want to give up time that they could spend sleeping, or with the younger kids, it's really about playing outside with their friends before they go into the building. And so we really have found that making breakfast a part of the school day is the most effective way to make sure that all kids have the opportunity to take advantage of this important meal. And my final slide, I just wanted to answer a question which people always ask is, how can schools afford higher participation? There's a lot of concern that it's expensive to provide breakfast to kids. But one thing that has really been found in the research done on the cost is that part of the reason that breakfast programs are expensive is because they are so poorly participated in. And that once you increase participation closer to the lunch participation level, you are able to bring down, through labor efficiencies and other economies of scale, the cost per meal, especially when you bring down the labor cost per meal. It really changes the whole equation. And the increased federal revenue that comes into the school, especially in schools with high percentages of low-income students where you're getting the higher federal reimbursement, really is able to cover the cost of the meal. And then the other positives with having the high participation in breakfast, as Mark mentioned, there's better attendance at school. And when you improve your average daily attendance, that means better general education funding coming into that school building, and so it's really beneficial to the school building as a whole. They get more contributions and more funding often for their general education programs. So that's, in a nutshell, the background that I wanted to give you. I really welcome any further questions or comments via email or phone. Feel free to contact me anytime. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Madeline, for joining us. I urge everyone on the call, if you have any questions, put that into the question box, and we have time available at the end to answer those questions one-on-one. In the meantime, we're going to move to our next speaker, who is Annie Lionburger, who is the Manager of Health and Wellness Promotion at the Chicago Public Schools. Annie provides leadership and administration in developing advocacy, policy approaches, and guidance to advance Chicago Public Schools' commitment to student health and wellness. Annie has worked in several local and international organizations to address socioeconomic and health disparities, including the Greater Chicago Food Depository, where she served as Director of Programs from 2009 to 2011. So I would like to welcome our friend and colleague, Annie. So please, the floor is yours, Annie.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to highlight some of the work we do at Chicago Public Schools. And I just want to mention that I'm joined today by Mark Arakelian, who is the Director of Special Projects at Chartwell-Thompson, which is one of our two food service providers here in Chicago. So if you advance to the next slide, please. So today, just we'll be giving some background about our breakfast program, talk a little bit about its implementation and the sustainability thereof, and then also talk through some of the challenges and successes that we've had. Next slide. So we thought it would be important to give some context about the students and families that we serve in Chicago Public Schools. We have a large district of about 407,000 students, 83% of whom are eligible for free and reduced price meals. We have about 675 schools and serve 76 million meals a year, give or take. We feel like our role in nutrition support services is an important one, considering the food insecurity rates in our county and in our city, and also access to fresh fruits and vegetables, both nationally, but of course in our own communities. And we feel our work is important in addressing that. Next slide, please. And just, I wanted to put this in the context of our work around breakfast, in the context of some of the other initiatives that we have undertaken in order to ensure that our students have access to healthy food and opportunities for fitness while they're in school. In 2009, we convened a group of local and advocates and experts in nutrition and revised our menu standards, which now exceed the guidelines for the USDA's gold standard, both for breakfast and for lunch, and we implemented those in the fall of 2010. Those guidelines, I just want to note, exceed or meet the recommendations of the Harvard report on breakfast, and also for lunch, the recommendations from the Institute of Medicine. And I think I just lost the PowerPoint.
Annie, I'm sorry, we're having some technical issues. We'll be right back.
Great.
Okay, we should be back.
Okay. Okay. Great. Next slide, please. So we, as Madeline and Mark have both mentioned, we knew that breakfast was integral to the health and wellness of our students, and really saw a large discrepancy between the number of meals, the number of breakfasts we were serving versus the number of lunches. And so we decided that determining and identifying a strategy to reduce that discrepancy was a priority for the district. And if you'll advance to the next slide, we quickly came to the conclusion that breakfast in the classroom was that solution. So before 2007, our program looked a lot like what Madeline described. Students had to arrive to school early to eat breakfast in the cafeteria, and for a variety of reasons that seemed to be a challenge that some of them were unable to overcome. And so in 2007, we piloted our first breakfast in the classroom school, and due to the success of that launch, we then in 2008 hired a team to help expand the program, which we did to 80 schools 85 schools in 2009 who voluntarily elected to participate in the program. And we also established a policy for breakfast to be universal. So regardless of the student's income, they were able to participate in the program without a cost. In 2010, the number of schools grew to 200 that were electing to provide breakfast in the classroom. And again, due to the recognized importance of breakfast and the success of the pilot at the 200 schools, the Board of Education in Chicago decided to make the breakfast in the classroom program mandatory for all elementary schools. So that was fully launched in all elementary schools by June of 2011. And we also had a high school, which is on the northwest side of the city, decide to sort of adapt the model, the elementary model, to their high school, which is something that we've been very fortunate to expand now in 2012 to 5 additional high schools. We also, this year, have been working on some pilot projects to reduce waste, both environmental and food, that are associated with breakfast, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, and also evaluating the barriers to participation among our middle and high school students where participation tends to decline. Next slide, please. So this is what the plan for school implementation looks like. Our implementation team would meet with the school 2 weeks prior to the launch of the program to really determine how to tailor the program sufficiently for each school, meet with the principal and make those decisions. And then the week prior would meet with teachers to tell them about the program and then train the school dining staff. And then, of course, with the week of the launch, like any new program, there were tweaks to be made and more training to be done, and any modifications to the program that needed to be made were. Next slide. And here you sort of see the process that students would go through when they walk into the school building. They would be able to choose from a hot or cold breakfast in most cases that's pre-bagged by our school dining staff. School breakfast is usually served from a predetermined location when the students walk in from the outdoors, so they know where to go to get it. And then teachers will check off the students who are participating in the program on a roster as they take attendance. And cleanup takes place immediately after breakfast service. Next slide, please. We feel like this is a really important 10-minute investment, and the lunch and the cleanup, we really do make great efforts to ensure that that does happen within 10 minutes. And we feel like it's an important investment to ensure that our students are able to take advantage of this important program. And of course, you know, we do our best to tailor the program to each school, but the process is always designed so that we can ensure that students can be at their desks before the tardy bell. We want to ensure that teachers have the tools to both incorporate educational activities during the breakfast service, but also that they can do some of the administrative tasks that they would need to do regardless of the program. So for example, taking attendance or making announcements, collecting homework, etc. Next slide, please. And just a few other things to consider. Of course, no student is ever required to take a meal. It is completely optional. And I'm sure like other districts, have dealt with food allergy issues, and as such, all of our breakfast menus are both peanut and tree nut free. And then in some cases, we've developed unique strategies to schools based on their space or their population. And also just to note that we've really worked collaboratively with local organizations and federal, national organizations, both to develop best practices and to get input and advice about the program. Next slide, please. So what we found, of course, through all of these efforts is that we were able to increase participation pretty substantially, and were able to serve it between 2009 and 2010 an additional 6 million meals, which we feel very, very happy with and excited about. And of course, we'll continue to work to ensure that all of our students have access to breakfast. Next slide, please. There are, of course, with any new program, challenges to overcome and to address, and we felt like we were able to manage through most of them. Sanitation, of course, was one, and ensuring that schools and classrooms have the proper cleanup materials so that everything gets put in the right place afterwards, and class can continue or begin directly after the breakfast service wraps up. I'll talk about waste in just a moment, and we also, of course, have dealt with issues of instructional time. Chicago has sort of notoriously had one of the shortest school days in the country, and so while we tried to ensure that the program ran as efficiently as possible, of course, there were concerns about reducing instructional time as a result of the program. We're very hopeful that with our new mayor and our new administration at the Chicago Public Schools, We will have what looks like a 7.5-hour day, which aligns much more with the national average. So the concerns about instructional time, while they won't go away, will certainly be addressed through this longer day. Next slide, please. We've also been fortunate to have a lot of successes in the program. The first, of course, being a significant increase to our meal participation. We've also had really great feedback from schools, both around observed improvements in attendance of students and also decreased tardiness and student misconduct. We also are very excited that we've been able to share the best practices in forums like this and others with the school districts around the country about the models that we've developed. And of course, as is important to any program like this, we've also had to engender a lot of internal support at CPS, and so we've now got very broad interdepartmental support for this program. And I'll talk about Love Food, Hate Waste in the next slide, please. So environmental stewardship is something that has been of great concern to us, and we are taking strides to address as we speak. Most of our paper bags, or I should say all of our paper bags, are 60 to 100% recycled. We're also working on providing biodegradable materials whenever possible and reducing the waste associated with the program by minimizing the volume thereof. We have a pilot where we're implementing the use of biodegradable products as well. Next slide, please. We're also working on recycling. Through a generous grant from Action for Healthy Kids, we are working with 25 schools to develop strategies to reduce the environmental waste associated with breakfast. And we hope that those 25 schools will help serve as a model to expand those initiatives across the district. We're working on milk carton recycling and also really encouraging schools to ensure that the breakfast bags and placemats are recycled in the blue bins that are available in all of our classrooms. We also are looking at how to reduce food waste by encouraging students to only take what they want, and then of course to eat what they take. But knowing that not every student is going to eat all of the food that they get, we have implemented a Love Food, Hate Waste program in which students are asked to put all of their uneaten fruit and non-perishable food into a bag that is then collected by our school dining staff and re-inventoried for use the next day. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, Madeline mentioned some of the changes to the meal guidelines. We're very close to achieving those standards already, but of course we'll be focused on that in the next few years. As I mentioned, looking at identifying these best practices and then expanding them across the district, working with our high schools to increase breakfast participation by adapting a model similar to our in-classroom breakfast to a high school setting, working on getting students engaged and excited about breakfast, and then also sharing of best practices with other districts. So like Madeline, Mark and I are more than happy to answer any questions, and with that I will pass it back to Mark.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Annie. Two quick comments. The first one is some great questions are coming in, so after Brian we'll open up for Q&A, and I think there's going to be some good discussion. And then the second, I would just like to note that my son is participates in the Breakfast in the Classroom program on a daily basis. He actually looks forward to those early mornings with his fellow classmates when he's diving into his paper bag. So next up, we have Brian Giles, a new friend of ours. So Brian, he's a senior administrator of food services for Houston Independent School District. In his current role, he directs food service for Houston Independent School District, the 7th largest public school system in the U.S., serving more than 200,000 students. Brian has worked with child nutrition operations for 13 years, including roles at 8 school districts in Utah and Texas. In April 2010, Brian received a bronze medal by the Jefferson Awards for Public Service for his work in organizing and promoting efforts to improve child nutrition and wellness within Houston School District and the broader Houston community. So Brian, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you a little bit today. The information that I will be sharing today, again, I think we've seen a lot of great information about the benefits and the research behind school breakfast and the impact, the positive impact it has on students. So I will largely focus on what we did in Houston in terms of an implementation plan. So go ahead, next slide. We first started our breakfast program by deciding that we needed to assign a name to it. And so the name we refer to in Houston to our breakfast in the classroom program is first class breakfast. And so that's, if I refer to first class breakfast, that's what it means. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea, and I think this reflects some information that Madeline had spoken about earlier, we, a number of years ago, had implemented universal free breakfast. In other words, because over 80% of our 200,000 plus students qualify for free or reduced meals, we decided to basically offer a free breakfast meal to every student. What we found is that very few of them were participating, and so we did a pretty large-scale survey and asked students why or what would improve their consumption of breakfast. And you see really their answers to 3 key questions. The top and bottom question there, I would eat breakfast more often if there was more time before class and if it were more convenient. Over 62% of students answered affirmatively there. And it's interesting, the middle question, I have more energy when I eat breakfast. It was interesting to see that students recognize the link between their energy and their brain power during the day and eating a healthy breakfast. So that told us a few things. Next slide. What we started with before we implemented it across the district was a pilot program. And we saw some very different results in the schools that were offering our first class breakfast program versus breakfast in the traditional serving method in the cafeteria. I'll wait for that next slide to come up. We saw that in those schools that were offering traditional breakfast, only about 30% of all students were participating in breakfast. So that was interesting. Again, as a reminder, every student, they just had to walk in the door. Every student was able to get a free breakfast if they so chose. Compared to our pilot schools where over 80% of kids were participating. Our rollout schedule, we went to the Board of Education and they approved us to actually implement our first class breakfast program in all elementaries and all middle schools, and that equals about 220 campuses. And you'll just see our methodology here behind the rollout. We prioritized in the first 1 or 2 waves the high free and reduced eligible schools. Next slide, please. The key to our program, and it differs, and it was great that Madeline highlighted some different ways in which breakfast in the classroom works. Chicago focuses on the grab-and-go model. We focus on the breakfast in the classroom model, delivered straight to the classroom. And you'll see in terms of preparation, we actually use blueprints of the school and map out specific delivery routes. And a menu cycle is planned, and certainly breakfast is cooked and prepared each morning. But basically the way this process works is this. Student ID cards are provided to students in the classroom, and shortly before the bell rings, insulated food carts arrive right in front of the classroom door. The students line up who wish to participate in breakfast and exchange their ID card, their barcode coded ID card for a hot meal. And the food service attendant leaves a trash bag for that class, and so when they're done, the students deposit the trash in the garbage bags, and they place them directly outside the classroom door. When our food service attendants are finished with their delivery routes, they make another run through the hallway and pick up all of those trash bags, and then head straight back to the kitchen and then just scan in the ID cards of those students and then return those to the teachers. It's a very efficient process we found. Again, requires minimal time and minimal impact to the classroom Next slide. Another key portion of this, obviously, is the communication, as Annie mentioned. These are examples of materials that we distributed to schools. Those materials included an actual DVD with a video file where students, parents, principals could actually watch how the program would work at their school. Next slide. And finally, I think similar to what Annie had spoken about, I think these are some similar obstacles. One of the first things we found out and heard very strongly from many parents in several town hall meetings we held across the city of Houston, there were many parents, or some parents in some locations, who may not have wanted their child to participate in, and they wanted to make sure that if they ate breakfast at home, that they didn't eat again in school. And so we instituted an opt-out process where parents could fill out an opt-out form, and so sort of a check and balance there for their student. In terms of the interruption of classroom time, really, and these best practices came out of individual campuses, what we found was that the majority of feedback from teachers we have received over the past year and a half, where we've have implemented this program, is that the majority of housekeeping tasks, for example, sharpening pencils, collecting homework, getting pieces of paper, all of those things that eat up time during the day, they were able to do during breakfast time and really gain that time back as the school day went on. And finally, food waste. Because we deliver straight to the classroom, we have initially started out with a straight serve model. In other words, we give the student a full meal and they choose what they want. In over 90 schools now, we've implemented and changed to an offer versus serve model where students can choose a minimum of 2 items and refuse a maximum of 2. And so that has, in some schools, cut waste in up to 50% in some schools. So that has been really a great addition to those schools that have opted in. So certainly wanted to leave time for questions and answers, so hopefully we've done that. And next slide, I think, is our question slide.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian, for your time. We actually have had a ton of questions come in, so we're going to get started in just a moment with questions. I will say we're going to do our best to answer as many as possible. If we don't answer them on this webinar, we will try to answer them offline and then post them on our website. This entire webinar will be archived on our website for later viewing. And I'll just reiterate one more time. There are grants available for school districts, particularly in high-need rural areas. So if your school district has the opportunity to apply, we would encourage you to do so. So having said that, Alex, will you please go through the questions that we have?
Great, thanks, Mark. So the first questions we're going to ask, there were a couple that were specific to Madeline's presentation. So for Madeline, there was a question, is school breakfast considered a political issue, and are charter schools providing breakfast?
Great. The first question, well, let me answer the second one first. Charter schools do participate in the school breakfast program, and in fact, Mark Erkilian, who is there with Annie, implemented breakfast at a group of charter schools in Chicago. So it's being implemented here in the District of Columbia at charter schools throughout the city and is actually required. I don't think that I would consider that we don't consider breakfast in the classroom a political issue. I think that for all of the nutrition programs, we have always had amazing bipartisan support in Congress for funding for them, and that it's always been considered that feeding our kids and making sure that all kids can start the day with a healthy meal and have access to healthy food during the day is just an imperative, and it's not political.
Great, thanks so much, Madeline. And another question, we had actually quite a few questions come in around the role that local food plays in breakfast programs. So Annie and Brian, I don't know if you might be able to speak a little bit about that. Specifically, we had questions with regards to, can school breakfast programs support local farmers? What role do local farmers play in your program? So I don't know if either of you have thoughts on that question.
Yeah, this is Brian. I think at least for us, the easiest application of local sourcing would be the different fruit varieties that we offer, whole fruits and section fruit during breakfast. At least in Texas and in the Houston area, that is the easiest and most effective application of local procurement.
This is Mark Arkelian from Chicago. So for Chartwell Thompson Hospitality, that's definitely a priority for us. And over the past 3 years, we've increased our local procurement from little to none just a few years ago to it was about, I want to say, a couple $100,000 worth in the first year, and now we're looking at over $2 million worth of local produce. And for us, at the size district that we are, local for us really, everyone's definition is a little different, but it's really kind of regional. So a lot of stuff is really sourced from either Illinois, Wisconsin, or Michigan. Michigan apples probably being at the top of that list. We also have a local frozen vegetable program where it's a vegetable mix of corn and carrots and beans and peas for lunch anyway, where we're able to get that stuff harvested and frozen within 48 hours and then have that available throughout the rest of the school year. A little bit more challenging for breakfast. As I mentioned, apple is probably the big one that we're able to do. And then certainly as summer school rolls around, we're trying to source more a wider variety of local fruits on breakfast.
And this is Annie. I just want to put a good word in for our other food service vendor, Preferred Meal Systems, who is also making a lot of efforts to source our produce as locally as possible as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, both of you. Let's see. We have one question, and anybody in the group can feel free to take this. If you collect food that was already sold as a reimbursable meal and then collect it and re-inventory it and serve it again, would that be double dipping?
Well, this is Brian in Houston. Let me address that. First, I think one of the challenges that Houston faces, and I'm sure we're not unique nationwide, is that although federal law actually allows food recycling, in other words, if something is not consumed, then you can donate it or otherwise recycle it. Our actually city health department, of course, which can enact regulations or laws which are more strict than federal or state policy, does not allow anyone to do that. So our opportunity for reducing waste is really at selection time for the student and when they eat. So the challenge for us is providing a menu that students will really want to eat, and then encouraging as many schools as possible to use the offer versus serve method, where students only have to take a minimum of 2 and maximum of 4 so that we can reduce waste. There are a number of other locations where I think perhaps in other states with a very large focus on sustainability, there are a lot of opportunities to recycle some of that food. But in terms of, I guess, in terms of answering that specific question, I wish we had that problem, but we don't actually have the option in Houston or in Texas to recycle food that way.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. Here is another question for Madeline. Somebody has asked for clarification on what is the difference between Provision 2 and universal breakfast, if any. And Madeline, if you could speak a little about what Provision 2 is, maybe?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, Provision 2 is a provision of the law that allows schools to not have to collect school meal applications every year. So the difference between doing universal breakfast, offering breakfast at no charge to all students, Without Provision 2 and with Provision 2, without it, everything happens the same way. You have to count and claim each meal by which student eats it, and you collect your meal applications the same way. You just forego collecting the fees from the students, and everything else stays the same. In Provision 2, the actual mechanism for getting reimbursed by USDA changes, and it's based on a formula that's connected to the percentage of kids that are free, reduced, and paid in the base year, the last year that that school meal applications are taken. So it's a little bit more complicated, but when that's implemented, you don't have to count each meal by student. You just can count the number of meals that are served. So it allows for some real savings administratively and makes the school meal process quicker. So it makes it easier to serve more kids in the same amount of time, which makes a big difference in getting more kids through the line in the tight time frames that we have for breakfast and lunch.
Great, thank you, Madeline. So we've actually had a couple questions from people wanting to know how breakfast in the classroom has been received by students. So Brian or Annie, I don't know if you have any feedback that you've received from students about this program, or your programs, or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I'll just quickly answer with a recent conversation I had with an inner city high school that really has some academic struggles, high free and reduced eligible percentage of the student body. This was a high school that had actually opted into the program. It wasn't part of the initial rollout. They had initially opted into the program, and due to some feedback from and some concerns from teachers, et cetera, they opted out of the program. My meeting with the principal a couple of weeks ago was actually her wanting to opt back in. And so in response to that question, what she immediately saw was that students literally were not showing up for first period because there was not, the breakfast was no longer a draw. It was no longer offered in the classroom, and that's something they really look forward to. So I think, you know, and I think what Madeline had mentioned in the very beginning in terms of impacts of breakfast in the classroom, it certainly was very apparent at this high school that attendance and tardiness, attendance went way down, tardiness went way up when that program was eliminated. So I think you know, if you can say students vote with their feet, they certainly did at this high school.
Yeah, and this is Madeline. I have visited so many programs across the country, including there in Chicago, and I always talk to the kids about how they like it, and they just love it because they love getting to eat in their classroom with their friends. It's so much less hectic and crazy for them than the cafeteria, and they just love the time they're eating in the classroom. I've heard a lot of positive feedback from Chicago Public School students.
Yeah, this is Annie, and I would echo the sentiments that both Brian and Madeline shared. We have a student advisory group that we work with, and we feel that student voice is really critical, to engage. And so we've had a lot of great feedback, and we'll continually get feedback from them about both the food but also the experience.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. I would like to say it's been 1 hour, which is the original time of our scheduled webinar. However, we have a lot more questions, and a lot of people are still hanging there on the line. I want to ask everyone a quick poll question. And just take a moment, if you're willing to stay for a few more minutes, if you're willing to let us know if you're able and willing to stay for a few more minutes. And if you are, please, we are all able to take a few more minutes to answer some more questions. Understandably, if you have to get going, please, by all means, sign off. But let's just see what we are looking at. And polling will close in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and close. And it looks like, wow, we have, a good third of the people are saying, did I share it? Yeah, there it is. Are saying that they would like to spend 15 more minutes. With most, like, plurality are saying let's spend up to 15 more minutes. So let's see what we can do and get through. For those of you who had to go, thank you so much. This will all be posted online, and we will get the link out to you at a later date. Having said that, Alex, let's continue to go through our questions.
Great, thanks. So here is a question that anybody can feel free to take. How does a community that wants to make this happen for their district make this happen? So I don't know if any of the speakers have insight into resources that are out there, or what you feel like has been what is the most important component in getting your program up and running, but really any insight for a district that doesn't have a breakfast program that would like to get this going.
This is Brian in Houston. I just have two suggestions. I would say, number one, that you certainly would need to, if there currently is not an interest in your community or school district, part of that is to raise that interest to the forefront. Ultimately, the only way we were able to give access to that many kids at that many schools was by, in our district, the school board saying we will implement it at all elementary and middle schools. So in many locations, that decision should and must come from the school board. That being said, we do a lot of things here as pilot programs. I think there's a lot of value in starting small. If people are a little have a little trepidation in the beginning, starting small, proving your point, and then expanding the program, because then you have data to support what you're wanting to do. So I would say, and I guess to add a third point, really borrow and steal ideas from others who are currently doing breakfast in the classroom programs, so you don't have to recreate the wheel.
This is Annie. I think we have found that parents have been really instrumental in the success of this program and advocating for it. And we work very closely with organizations, including Healthy Schools Campaign's Parents United, who have rallied around the program, but also other organizations. And really, if you're a parent or if you want to get support for this program, I think starting with that core constituency is the place to try first.
Yeah, and this is Madeline. I would just build on those great suggestions and say, if you're looking for a local partner, feel free to contact me, and I can try to find an anti-hunger organization or a children's advocacy organization that would want to help you if you feel like you need some more support. There are great grants out there right now, and I think what Brian said is probably the most important. You need to just find one school to start in. In Chicago, that's how it started. In Houston, it all comes down to like one principal, in one building that wants to try this, and then you really build from there. And definitely try to go and visit a program. There are great videos up of programs, and you can see them in action, but there's nothing like going and seeing it up close and personal. And if you, again, need to find a program near you, just send me an email, and I'll try to find one that isn't too far away, because there are more and more programs all across the country.
Great, thank you. And on a related note, we've had a number of questions come in regarding ideas for building teacher and principal support for these programs. Is that something that, Brian or Annie, do you have insight into that?
Yeah, I would say the principal and teacher advocates we were able to develop were really those what we call early adopters. Those folks who we identified that really bought into the idea and saw the impact it was having in their schools. And then as we had town halls across the city, we would actually invite those parents and those teachers to talk about why it worked at their campus, and that was really effective.
Great, thank you, Brian. So another question, for grab and go or for breakfast in the classroom, are both cold and hot breakfasts served?
So this is Mark Arkelian. For Chicago, the majority are grab and go, and we are doing hot and cold option for those schools.
In Houston, which is the breakfast delivery model, we in the straight serve model we do 4 days hot, 1 day cold. In the offer versus serve model, in those 90 schools that have opted in there, we do a hot and cold option daily.
Great, thank you. So we've also had a number of questions come in regarding the impact that this has had on the custodial staff, specifically if it's increased the time of custodial staff and in terms of pest management.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think certainly that was another key concern in Houston because as we've been battling similar budget reductions as every other school district has, one of those departments significantly impacted was the custodial and maintenance folks. And what we saw was actually because our food service employees pick up the trash as they're coming back with their delivery routes, that again it eliminated a lot of work there. We also, no longer, because the breakfast was no longer served in the cafeteria, they no longer had the staff for cleanup of the cafeteria, and those personnel were free to roam in classrooms if there happened to be a spill or something needed to be fixed. So overall impact, I'd say negligible with custodial.
Yeah, I would say this is Mark Arkelian. This same thing in Chicago, kind of that trade-off of no longer having to clean up the lunchroom after breakfast and having the custodial time to go and pick up those trash bags was definitely a key point there. But more than anything, it was really having that early meeting with the principal, and sometimes principals would invite the engineer into that meeting so that because they knew they were going to be part of this process, and for it to work, it really had to be a team effort from everyone in the school, from the principals, the custodians, the teachers, and the lunchroom staff.
I would just add, now that we're at the point where we've expanded the program across our elementary schools and are developing best practices specifically around some of these waste reduction and waste management issues, we're finding ways to drill down into those by using things like webinars that are specific to our custodial staff or school engineers to help showcase the best practices that they're coming up with at their schools. So certainly that's something that we recognize as sort of a continuing effort, but I think we've found some good ways to address that.
Great, thank you. We've also had a number of questions regarding what type of food is well received. So I don't know if you have a sense of the types of food, both hot and or cold food, that are well received by students, and then also that are realistic for food service employees to prepare.
So I can start. Mark Arkelian again. So for us, I mean, almost universally, regardless of where in the city the school is, children very much like cold cereal and pancakes. So they're probably the top two things, and pancakes really kind of being on the hot menu, the number one option. And then even when we are able to serve hot and cold every day, there are still a good majority of students selecting that cold cereal option.
I'd say, this is Brian in Houston, of course, in the South, everyone loves what we call a kolache, which is sort of a pig in the blanket, a breakfast sausage in a whole grain bun. And I would say any type of handheld item, like a breakfast sandwich, whether it's a sausage or ham and cheese breakfast sandwich, our kids really love those things.
Great, thanks. And then we have a question actually from Mark Bishop at Healthy Schools Campaign asking to provide a little more details on the food service guide that is coming out.
The question about our guide for a more sustainable, greener, healthier food service. We are currently in the process of developing content, and the whole concept is how to engage and work with a school food service program to develop a program that's more sustainable and as well as healthy. And you know, at a very broad level, we're going to be breaking it into two main categories. So one is construction. And before you actually have a school, how do you think about designing a cafeteria and a kitchen for healthy food prep? How you think about proper queuing of lines as people line up for getting their food? How you think about proper sizing to make sure that we can get kids in and out of that classroom without having to have lunch periods that start at 9:45 and end at 2 o'clock. And one of my favorite issues is making sure that we're designing kitchens and cafeterias with adequate hand washing so we can actually get kids to keep healthy and safe with adequate hand washing and not having to disinfect hands with hand sanitizers consistently. And the other part of it is going to be broken down into looking at operations, waste management, recycling, cleaning procedures, food procurement and ordering, and you know, all of the different elements around thinking about food service program. And our intent is really to make a guide that helps spur thought and engagement from administrators down to school to food service programs down to parents, and how to create resources so that we can all work together, be on the same team, and ultimately not have a school food service program isolated and making decisions in a vacuum on their own. So we're expecting to have our document ready to go in early 2013. It's scheduled for January. Things sometimes get delayed, but that's our goal, and we're excited to be in that process of reaching out and creating that content and starting to really move all of our schools towards healthier, more sustainable programs.
Great, thanks, Mark. Another question we have is, how long did it take to deliver meals in the classroom, and how much staff was needed? So it sounds like this is in reference to starting this program. So maybe how long does it, on a day-to-day basis, how long does it take to deliver the meals and get them out to the class, to schools? But then also, Brian and Annie, I don't know if you have thoughts just in the grander timeline, how long did it really take this to get these programs up and running?
Yeah, just to clarify, our breakfasts are not delivered directly to the classroom. Students pick them up from a common area, usually a table near the entrance of the building, and then take them up to the classroom. And generally, you know, that should take, you know, less than 5 minutes between the time that the doors open and then they get to their classroom.
This is Brian. You know, when we decided to use the breakfast the breakfast delivery model straight to the classroom, one of our key goals was to make sure but from the time of arrival of the breakfast cart to the time where everybody was served took no longer than 5 minutes. So I would say similar time frame. Of course, you know, each one of our carts services about 4 to 5 classrooms. So every classroom would typically not be fed, you know, first thing in the morning, but it would only, once the breakfast cart reached that classroom, would only be really a 5-minute interruption at the door.
Wonderful, thank you. And we have one final question, which I think would be a good one to end on. Just if any of our speakers have knowledge of resources for PowerPoint or information out there that would be helpful for getting programs up and running. Madeline, I know that you offered to connect participants with local organizations that can help, but just a kind of final request for if any of our speakers have knowledge of resources out there that can be helpful in getting a program like theirs up and running.
Well, I think this is Madeline. I think the USDA breakfast expanding breakfast toolkit, which is on the USDA website. I know it can be a little bit intimidating there, but if you go to the school breakfast page, they have a link directly to it, and they have a sample PowerPoint that's really great. And then if you go to our FRAC website and go to Breakfast in the Classroom page, we've got a lot of links to organizations that have sample surveys and videos and all kinds of materials. So I think that you'll be able to find what you're looking for.
And this is Mark Bishop. When we post this webinar on our website, we will make sure to reach out to everyone who registered, and we will include links to the resources that Madeline just referenced. Anything else? Well, then what I want to say is it's actually 16 minutes past the hour, so we went over by quite a bit. I think we answered most, if not all, questions. So I would just like to say thank you to everyone who's still on the call. So I think we had a great call, great conversation. If anyone would like to reach out and have further questions, you can reach out to any of the speakers that are here. Reach out to me, Mark Fish, Healthy Schools Campaign. But we just like to say thank you, and we wish you all the best of luck as you try to promote healthier breakfast in your schools. And until next time, I wish you would join us on our next webinar series. You will be receiving updates from us, and we look forward to the next round of engagement. Thank you so much.